Welcome to the Holistic Ascent Podcast, where we dig into specific tools and resources to elevate your health in tangible and applicable ways. My name is Lexie Haren, and I'm your host of the podcast today. Before we get started, it's important to note that not every tool or topic explored here will be applicable to everyone. And that's the beauty of bioindividuality, and each of us bringing our own unique experiences and circumstances to the table. None of the information in this podcast is medical advice, and I always recommend working with a qualified practitioner to address any specific health concerns you may have. All right, let's dig in. Hey y'all, today we're diving into use, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we're going to dig into heat stress in general, biohacking, all this fun stuff. And so here's the thing, get a little wary of the way that information is spread in our world so quickly via social media. It's why I took a step back from posting all the time on Instagram, because I just think there's so much information going out there, and it's really hard to discern what is actually going to be applicable to us in our certain circumstances. So that's why I love this podcast opportunity, because we can actually dig into the nitty gritty here. We can put things into true context and actually explain ourselves more and also explain the why behind things. And I just think that's extremely valuable in today's day and age, is understanding that why or understanding the why not. If for some reason, there's so many things out there. If I think of like some of the top things in the biohacking world, I think of cold exposure, cold plunging, I think of sauna use, I think of continuous glucose tracking, I think of red light therapy, all of these different things. And I think there's a tremendous amount of value in some of these tools. I also think that there are also a lot of downfalls with some of these tools, and that not everything is going to be applicable for everyone. And that's honestly like what makes this whole journey beautiful, is that it looks different for everyone, and we're all on our own journey trying to figure that out. So that's just my little preface for this podcast episode, is that I want to dig into sauna use, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because if you would have talked to me, gosh, even like 8 months ago, last year, I would have been like, sauna use, oh my gosh, it's awesome, amazing, the best tool, very low risk. I think mostly everyone should utilize it, And after having my own run through with health concerns earlier this year and mold toxicity and mold exposure, which led to a whole slew of health and wellness problems, I learned that I wasn't able to tolerate the sauna very well. And that was really eye-opening to me, to think that this tool that I had been really preaching about the last, oh my goodness, probably 8 years of my life, was suddenly a tool that was no longer serving me well. And I think it's really important and powerful for us to come to those realizations in our wellness journey. And just because something's popular or being talked about by the top medical doctor in the world, we might want to actually think to ourselves, is that applicable to us in our unique circumstances, or is it not? So without further ado, I want to dive into this topic. So let me just share a little bit of my background and what even makes me qualified to talk about this. Well, my master's is in high altitude exercise physiology. So we did a lot of research studies back in grad school and even in undergrad in exercise and sports science as I was leading up to this. And we really took a liking to studying heat stress on the body and how we can actually improve our metabolic health through pretty natural forms of biohacking. And so I actually really loved my experiences I had in grad school and the opportunities I had leading up to that, because it gave me the opportunity to actually be in the research lab and doing these things with other individuals and seeing firsthand the impacts of certain tools and techniques to improve performance, to improve metabolic function, and all of that overall. So I want to share about a couple of the studies that really got me intrigued with sauna use in the first place, and just the general physiology behind heat stress and what happens in the body. We called our study The Acute Benefits of Cutting Weight, and Cutting Weight was a brand of sauna suits. And so essentially what individuals would do is they would put on a sauna suit, which would increase their stress or their heat in their body when they were exercising. And it would create this sort of heat stress environment for them without us having to have like a sauna around every individual while they were exercising. So we wanted to look at two different sides of the coin here. We wanted to assess the acute metabolic responses to exercise while someone was wearing the sauna suit under 4 different exercise duration and intensity conditions. And then we wanted to ideally quantify, if there was any, the potential increased metabolism in that individual, which was measured by their post-exercise oxygen consumption. So this was a value we could measure on them after they were done exercising to see if their metabolic rate was actually elevated after exercising in this heat stress condition. So we hypothesized that the exercise with the sauna suit would elicit significant increases in their metabolism and therefore result in a significant weight loss over time. So we had 12 different men perform 4 different exercise sessions in a randomized order. There were 20-minute bouts of vigorous intensity in a control group and then a group of people that were wearing the sauna suit. And then they had 30-minute bouts of moderate intensity exercise for the control group and the sauna suit group. So I know I'm getting a little technical here, but I think it's important to explain the background and get to where I'm going here eventually. With each trial of these individuals that were exercising in their sauna suits, we had them rest for 30 minutes and we had them do their exercise session. And then we had them sit there for an hour after they exercised. And we gathered more metabolic data through that post-exercise oxygen consumption. We had standard pre-test instructions for these people to make sure that we were keeping the data as clear as possible. And we didn't allow any of them to drink water during or following the exercise session while we were recording the metabolic rate. So we weren't inducing that cooling down period in their body. Their weight was measured before, after exercise, and then also 1 hour post-exercise. And then their caloric expenditure also calculated. So what we found is that these individuals that were exercising in the sauna suits in both vigorous and moderate temperatures, their energy expenditure was 10 to 13% greater than the group that didn't wear the sauna suit. So it had a significant impact on the overall caloric energy expenditure. We also found that there was a 19% to a 22% difference in their excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. And so this was an indicator of that metabolic rate being elevated for a longer period of time. So this was really just showing us that the exercise in the heat with that greater heat stress was improving that metabolic function over time, and it was staying elevated for a longer time after exercise as well. Now, this was just super interesting to me because it started getting the wheels turning for me. Like, wow, just by wearing a sauna suit when we exercise, we can really increase our metabolic health and we can get that extra bang for our buck from our exercise. Like, how applicable is this for maybe the individual who's just been trying to shed that extra few pounds of weight that's just super stubborn and they've been working really hard and exercising and working on their diet, yet it seems like they just can't get these extra few pounds off? Wow, this could be a really potent tool that could help them actually nudge them into that weight loss goal that they have. So I really loved this study because it really got my wheels turning and it opened my eyes up to this whole world of like, wow, we can use biohacking and we can use these tools that are relatively safe to help individuals really increase their benefits from the work that they're already putting in. And that's really cool in itself. So I want to take a different little tangent here for a second and talk about hormetic stress, because this is a really important aspect to understand when we're talking about any stressor on the body. Now, hormetic stress or hormesis is, I like to call, the sweet spot of stress. So we know that too much stress in our life can be bad, and too little stress can be bad because then we're not working on our resiliency and building up our ability to handle challenge and handle change. So hormetic stress is just enough stress to elicit long-term benefits in the body. I think exercise is a perfect example of hormetic stress. So exercise actually creates an environment in our body for potentially harmful substances like reactive oxygen and nitrogen species, free radicals, acids, and more to be released into the body. Now, that sounds terrible, but exercise is good for us, I thought, right? Yeah, well, when we apply the concept of hormetic stress here, we know that a little bit or a moderate bit of stress has long-term benefits. So we're finding that sweet spot again of the exercise that's actually valuable and beneficial. We're not overdoing it, we're not underdoing it. We're finding that sweet spot. Now, along with the many risks that there can be, there are many beneficial effects of exercise, as we know. We know that there's even better anti-inflammatory responses, better DNA repair, improved breakdown of damaged proteins and other molecules, and more when we're actually able to expose ourselves to exercise on a regular basis and increase our resilience because of it. So the goal here isn't to eliminate all stress and toxins and all these quote unquote bad things in our world to make our body healthy. Our goal really is to create a resilient body that also has a strong mineral foundation and is capable of handling the stressors of life thrown its way. So, what are some other examples of hormetic stress that are really common? I mean, I mentioned cold exposure, heat stress, strength training, endurance training, altitude training or altitude exposure, intermittent fasting, interval training, massage or myofascial release, and creating challenging goals for yourself to achieve in business and in life. I mean, you can see both flip sides of that, even like if you're way over challenging yourself and you're stressing your mind out to where you just can't even function, that's obviously not healthy. But also, if we don't have any goals or things that we're working towards, that's not the best place to be in as well. So, hormetic stress is really interesting in that this mild amount of stress actually stimulates this hormetic response within the body. And that actually increases the ability of the body to increase heat shock proteins in the body. It increases some signaling between the cells, the unfolding of proteins in the body, and the ability of the cells to break down super toxic cells. And so we actually, by exposing ourselves to mild stress, we are increasing some of these factors within the body at a physiological level that are actually helping our body get to a more conditioned state. Now, if we skip that step of mild stress and we just go to like extreme stress, then we're actually contributing more to the problem and contributing to that cellular damage and cell death versus the stress resistance and cellular survival mechanisms. It's really valuable just to understand, I think, these basic principles of hormetic stress and understanding that sweet spot of stress so we can know, like, are we causing more harm? Are we causing more good here? So specifically in today's conversation, we're going to talk about hyperthermic conditioning. So this is using a form of heat stress to improve fitness and build a generalized physiological tolerance to stress through heat acclimation. So when we're able to acclimate our body to heat, there's a handful of valuable benefits that happen within the body. We see increased maximum cardiac output, so our heart becomes more efficient at pumping blood. We see increase in vein supply throughout the body, so our body becomes more effective at distributing blood and utilizing oxygen. We typically see decrease in blood pressure. We see increase in our sweat production, so a better ability to eliminate toxins, and increased stress response. So that means that the body is having better cooling mechanisms going on within itself. We typically see improved VO2 max, so the oxygen consumption that we're using during exercise. And we see that the body overall, when we are acclimated to heat, is better able to maintain temperature. So how do we know that someone actually has acclimated well to heat exposure? We usually see that there's an increase in their plasma volume in their blood. We see that early onset of sweating during exercise, and then the sweat actually becomes more dilute. So we're not losing as many electrolytes. We see that there's less muscle glycogen breakdown, so we're able to have better endurance. Now, the main thing that happens when we're trying to acclimate our body to heat is that this important factor is released in the body called the heat shock protein. So why do we need more heat shock proteins? Well, they play this integral role in our immune function, our cell signaling, and our cell cycle regulation in our body. So all very important things that we need for our body to function At a foundational level, when we have increased heat shock proteins released into our body, we actually see protection in our body against neurodegenerative processes and diseases. So we see this whole body adaptation where we become more tolerant to heat, and we actually see these protective cellular responses happening that help our body for the long term. So that's why heat shock protein is great. That's why exercising is great, why using the sauna for some individuals may be valuable, why generating heat within our body, whether that's through movement or eating food or different things, is really valuable and essential for life. So now that we have this background on hormetic stress and heat shock proteins and kind of what happens at a physiological level when we're exposed to heat stress, let's dig into sauna use specifically. Some fun facts to start about sauna use. So saunas were invented by the Finns 2,000 years ago. Long time ago. So in Finnish culture, the sauna is a place of purity, health, and cleanliness. In fact, this is a super fun fact. Finnish women gave birth in saunas when it was cold outside until hospital births became a thing because they wanted their baby to be born into this warm and safe environment. Today, there is a ratio of one sauna to every 2 people in Finland. Crazy. In Russia, the sauna bathing practice involves you sitting in the sauna, and then after you break your first sweat, it's common to cool off with a splash of cold water or by stepping outside and dumping a cold bucket of water over your head and then re-entering the sauna until you break another sweat. And you kind of repeat this cycle over and over. That's their tradition. Now, in Mexico and South America, sweat lodges are a big thing. And essentially, these are steam baths that are supposed to help clear the mind of impurities, detoxify the body, and they tend to incorporate spiritual practices and herbs into these sweat lodge experiences. And I'm sure you've heard probably good and bad things about sweat lodges. So just always showing both sides of the coin here. As we dig into this whole sauna use topic, I want to talk about a handful of different things. We'll dig into the differences of traditional versus infrared saunas, the research behind it, indications and contraindications, and like why or why not we might want to use the sauna. So the traditional dry sauna, this is like your cedar sauna that has the little heater in it. There's not typically any water used in these traditional dry saunas. They're usually utilized for relaxation or a part of lifestyle in European countries like Finland and Russia. And traditional uses involve bathing in the sauna until you feel very hot. You step outside, you cool with a bucket of water, and then you repeat the process. The ambient temperature of the traditional dry sauna is usually kept anywhere between 176 degrees to 212 degrees Fahrenheit, with a relative humidity of 10 to 20%. Now, I find this research to be super interesting, but in Finland, they did this research study and they were looking at the association between sauna bathing and fatal cardiovascular and all-cause mortality events. So they were looking at individuals, if anyone had some sort of heart attack or cardiac-related event, that was related to using the sauna. So they studied 2,000 middle-aged Finnish men, and these individuals were using the sauna on a regular daily basis, and they followed these individuals for 20 years. Talk about an epic research study here. I think that's insane. But what they found is that the men who use the sauna 2 to 3 times a week were 27% less likely to die from cardiovascular disease than the men who used the sauna once a week. More regular use of the sauna was better for cardiovascular health. They found that the men who used the sauna 4 to 7 times per week, however, were 50% less likely to die from cardiovascular disease. So there was this huge jump between the individuals that used the sauna 2 to 3 times a week and those who used it 4 to 7 times a week. And it was from 27% to 50% less likely to die from cardiovascular disease. So this really shows us that there's this specific dose response relationship where like frequency and duration were really critical for improving the individual's cardiovascular health. So one little aspect I like to dive into on this is like, why does this work? Well, the sauna use mimics cardiovascular exercise. As an individual is sitting in the sauna, it actually stimulates your heart rate to rise and elevate typically somewhere between 100 to 150 beats per minute. And that's very similar to the heart rate an individual might experience while they are engaging in low to moderate intensity exercise. So we see the plasma volume increases and blood flow increases to the heart, and therefore there's less cardiovascular strain over time. Additionally, we saw that the men that used the sauna 2 to 3 times a week had a 24% lowered all-cause mortality than those who used once a week. Those who used the sauna 4 to 7 times a week were 40% less likely to die of neurodegenerative diseases like cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and others. So that's pretty crazy just there in itself. So that's the dry sauna, traditional dry sauna. Another popular sauna that's out there today, which you probably have heard more about, is the infrared sauna. So the difference here is that the infrared sauna, its ambient temperature is kept between 114 to 140 degrees, which is significantly lower than the traditional Finnish sauna. So it's not heating that air up around you to that really high temperature, which might be more appropriate for individuals with heat sensitivities as the ambient air is much less intense. So that can be a positive of the infrared sauna. Additionally, there's deeper wavelength penetration from these infrared waves. So the infrared light waves may go deeper into your tissues, promoting cellular healing at a deeper level. I think there's still a lot more research that needs to go into this. It's definitely a newer technology for sure, and definitely using that infrared light waves to cause that cellular heat and that release of the heat shock protein. So I'd love to see more research. I don't fully understand the whole science behind the infrared light and skin penetration here. So I typically tend to stick more with what I'm comfortable with when I'm applying things for myself in my wellness journey. But I do know there are some experts out there in the infrared light world. There's a company called Gemba Red, and I have one of their red light therapy devices, and I love reading their blog because they do a really great job at explaining the differences between all of these different infrared, like whether it's near infrared or far infrared, and these wavelengths and the amount of exposure that is supposed to be healthy versus detrimental. And so if I were to be using an infrared sauna anytime in the near future, I would do my due diligence and dig deeper into that research and make sure I'm really not overexposing myself to those wavelengths and getting that ideal dose response. So if we're looking at the traditional dry sauna and the infrared sauna, and we're looking at the benefits of both of them together, both of them are shown to promote a myriad of health benefits, triggering that release of the heat shock protein, catering to better metabolic health, promoting quicker muscle recovery post-workout, better blood circulation, helping the body handle stress better, and promote that mental health from that. I'll run through the differences between the dry sauna and infrared sauna just in a little checklist so we can really make sure we understand the difference here. So the traditional dry sauna is usually kept between 176 degrees to 212 degrees. They found in a lot of the studies that the sweet spot was around 174 degrees, where we're actually starting to see those improvements in metabolic health from exposure. The body might sweat quicker and improve detox pathways quicker as there's a higher ambient temperature in the traditional dry sauna, which helps to increase our body's natural cooling mechanisms and temperature regulation mechanisms. Now, the traditional dry sauna might not be ideal for heat sensitive individuals, but it is backed by hundreds of years of research and even traced back to ancient times. So I rest assured knowing that there's a lot of history of use of the traditional saunas, and I love that. And I love that it's just a part of the lifestyle in a lot of European countries, which is so different than it is here in the US. The infrared sauna, on the other hand, is kept at temperatures between 114 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sweet spot is usually around 120 degrees. Now, this might be more ideal for those heat sensitive individuals, and a good starting point for individuals who might have pre-existing conditions that make it difficult to start their heat therapy journey. So this might just be a more gradual approach for someone who's trying to build up their endurance or tolerance to heat. It's a newer modality with not as much research as far as those infrared wavelengths go. Sometimes there are more portable versions of the infrared saunas. Like I've even seen these weird like tinfoil tent ones that you like literally sit in a chair and you put it up around you and then you just put this light in there. Some of them emit a lot of EMFs depending on the model. That's a whole nother topic for a whole nother podcast episode. So like you can see here, like I'll add this image into the show notes or a link to the image. I made this little Venn diagram and it just shows the differences and the commonalities between the two, but there's pros and cons to both. And I think that's important to consider before picking what is most applicable for you. So what are some of the major benefits of sauna use? Well, we know that there's enhanced athletic performance, increased metabolism, ability to burn fat. We find that there's more resilience to stress, which is great because that heat shock protein is increased in helping the integrity of the other cellular functions. We see improved cardiovascular health because we're essentially exercising that heart muscle as it's increasing when we're exposed to that stress. A lot of people mention brain benefits like memory, clarity, and focus getting better after regular sauna use. We know that there's detoxification benefits that come from sweating out things like heavy metals. We've seen that individuals have been able to get a better grip on their depression and anxiety through regular sauna use, and are even able to use sauna to help them better adapt to other stressors in life. So we actually did some further research in grad school looking at how sauna use and heat therapy can help us better adapt to high altitudes. And I thought that was really fascinating. It turns out the heat shock protein is also a very important piece of the puzzle when we're looking to adapt better to high altitude environments. And so when we're able to increase that heat shock protein through other environments, that can actually help us cross acclimatize and cross adapt. Hey, it's Lexie. I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. This episode is sponsored by Haren Holistic's Functional Labs and Homeopathy. Haren Holistic's goal is to bring empowerment back to you in your wellness journey. By using functional lab tests like the hair tissue mineral analysis and GI map stool analysis, Haren Holistics is able to provide you with individualized protocols that are unique to you and your life circumstances. You can learn more about working with a qualified practitioner through Haren Holistics by visiting HarenHolistics.com and finding the service and booking guide, also available here in the show notes. Mention the Holistic Ascent Podcast to get 10% off your services. Now, let's get back to the show. So when we're looking at further benefits of sauna use in helping protect against cardiovascular disease or looking at the benefits that it can have on our cardiovascular health, we can look at a sauna session compared to an exercise session. So I think this is really fascinating and something that's not always looked at. But in the sauna, if you're in a mild to hot temperature for 20 to 30 minutes, according to these studies and research that have been done, the individual's heart rates would get up to 100 to 150 beats per minute. Now, if you were to do that same sort of exercise, moderate to vigorous exercise in the gym, we would often see the heart rate go to 100 to 150 beats per minute. So we see that through the long-term sauna use, we see those benefits like improved blood pressure, improved endothelial function, reduced inflammation overall, and more regulation of lipids within the body. The way that the sauna helps reduce inflammation is that we see a decrease in the release of a molecule called the C-reactive protein. Now, the C-reactive protein is released into the blood to signal or notify the body of an inflammation response. With regular sauna use, we're seeing a decrease in that protein. Therefore, there is a decrease in overall inflammation response in the body. We also see an increase in interleukin 10. And interleukin 10 is an anti-inflammatory cytokine that helps the body fight inflammation and maintain homeostasis. We're able to see that improved mental state from sauna use because of the neurogenesis and better blood flow to the brain. I mean, just simply put, from a foundational level, it makes sense. If we're able to have better oxygen carrying capacity within our body, we're obviously going to have better mental health because of that. We also see the release of endorphins during sauna use, the release of norepinephrine and dynorphin. We tend to see better exercise performance because first off, we have better recovery after we've been exercising due to that increased blood flow and muscle recovery. And we also are improving our adaptation to exercise because we're increasing our adaptation to the heat as well. We see that increased cardiac output overall, which means that the heart becomes more efficient and tends to generate a better overall capacity of pumping blood efficiently. We also see increased lung function from that as well. Now, the detoxification effects. So we know that in our world nowadays, the environment we live in can be really toxic. There's heavy metals, microplastics, pesticides literally everywhere. And a huge value of regular sweating is simply excreting these heavy metals, plastics, and pesticides through our sweat, and therefore improving our overall metabolic pathways. Another study looked at the clinical effects of regular dry sauna bathing, noted that there was improved adaptation to stress with regular sauna bathing, and it was enhanced by excretion of toxins through heavy sweating. Many industrial toxicants included heavy metals, pesticides, and various petrochemicals may be excreted in sweat, leading to an enhancement of metabolic pathways and processes that these toxic agents inhibit. Sweat-induced excretion of toxic metals such as arsenic, cadmium, lead, and mercury has been reported with the rates of excretion matching or exceeding urinary routes. So this study was showing that these individuals' ability to sweat out these toxins was more efficient than them peeing out the toxins through their urine. So I just thought that was super fascinating. And I've actually heard other podcasts talk about the amount of microplastics that we sweat out when our pores open up. And I just think that is super crazy to think about. I'd love to actually see some solid research on this and see if they're able to measure the amount of microplastics that are coming out of someone's body. I know they say we consume like a credit card size of microplastics or absorb that much every week through plastics. Everything's touching plastic nowadays. But I'd be really interested to see what our mechanism is of us excreting that through our pores, through sweating. I think that would be super awesome. So if anyone's got any leads on that, be sure to let me know. Sauna can also be super valuable for individuals who needing to get the benefits of exercise, but can't expose their bodies or their joints to that kind of stress. So it can be super valuable, whether it's an orthopedic reason or a cardiovascular reason, for some reason cannot engage in moderate exercise. It might be a valuable tool for them to be able to use the sauna to get those cardiovascular benefits. Instead, one study I read was showing that patients had fewer and more moderate ischemic changes on the EKG and fewer ectopic or irregular beats during sauna bathing than during exercise. So that just kind of shows right there that for those individuals, it may be valuable to try something different if exercise is causing erratic heart rates or things like that. So we labeled this episode Sauna Use, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly for a reason. So I want to talk about the bad and ugly parts of sauna use here because I think it's important to look at all sides of the equation when we are looking to introduce something into our routine. In the study that they did with the 2,000 Finnish men, almost all hyperthermia deaths in Finland exposed to too much heat from 1970 to 1986 took place in saunas. And all were considered accidents. Most of the victims were middle-aged men. 84% were under the influence of alcohol. So that's really important to consider right there. Don't use the sauna if you are under the influence of alcohol. Then 27% of those had cardiovascular disease as well. In the grand scheme of things, this is actually not a huge alarming number. And to know that alcohol was a cofactor in those deaths from the sauna is very important to consider. So other contraindications, obviously, aside from consuming alcohol and using the sauna at the same time, would be those individuals who had recent cardiovascular events, those with chest pain, severe aortic stenosis, unstable coronary heart disease, decompensated heart failure, individuals who are dehydrated. So probably shouldn't go in the sauna if you're dehydrated. And other things that are important to consider are individuals if they have orthostatic hypotension, where you have that low blood pressure, you have that drop when you stand up from a sitting position, or those individuals who are taking medications that can impact the body's detox pathways and other things, because we know that can just cause a whole slew of issues being on certain medications. So those are the main contraindications that are usually talked about in research studies. Now, I think it's important to also take into account personal experience. So I'll share a little bit of my story here, but I was using the sauna regularly the last handful of years, and I would go 4 to 5 times a week, and I'd make sure it was at least 170 degrees because I wanted to get the maximum benefit. I would stay in for 20 minutes. So I was getting my ideal dose response to get the maximum benefit from the sauna. So this was working really well for me for a long time. I felt actually really great. I felt really level-headed and clear-minded, and I felt like my body was recovering better and detoxing better with this in my routine. And then suddenly, when I moved to northern Idaho, where I reside now, and I started using a different sauna that I wasn't using before up here, and I had some other health issues going on, I started to notice that I felt significantly worse when I would get out of the sauna. And I was sitting in there for less time. The temperature was a lot hotter, and this one I think was more around 182 or something. So I was like, 15 to 20 minutes, that's great. I would get out of the sauna. I'd make sure I had plenty of electrolytes. I would make sure that I was not staying in if I was getting dizzy or lightheaded. And then I found that my gut issues I was experiencing were getting a whole lot worse. I found that my stress and my nervous system regulation was just getting a whole lot worse. And it felt a lot worse on the days where I went to the sauna versus the days that I didn't. And so I started digging because I was curious about this. I could see the connection almost immediately, and I just wasn't sure why I was starting to experience this when it had been such a valuable tool for me for so long. And what I found is that saunas can harness a ton of mold spores if they are not cared for properly. And at this time, I had found out that my husband and I had been exposed to mold, black mold, in our house that we were living in. He had a chronic cough, and I had a lot of random things start to happen. My lymph nodes were swollen, my thyroid was swollen, and had all the gut issues and stuff too. So I was experiencing that from my home environment, and I was also using the sauna regularly. And I started to dig deeper, and even when we removed ourselves from our home environment with that mold exposure, when I was still using the sauna, I still found that I was feeling bad. So I found that through my research that the saunas, especially in public gyms, and especially in the gym I was going to, where people were coming straight from the pool and sitting in the sauna with their wet bathing suits and wet towels and that hot, humid, gross environment, was probably fostering a ton of mold growth and mold spore exposure for me. So when I would go into the sauna at this gym specifically, I could smell that interesting, like musky kind of smell. And I think if you've smelt it before, you know what I'm talking about. But there's a very distinct smell to it, and I can tell the wood in there is not great, and I don't think they clean it very well, and there is not good ventilation in there. All recipes for mold growth, including the humidity and the warm temperature. And so found that this is actually not an uncommon thing for individuals that are experiencing mold toxicity after being exposed to mold, whether it be in their house or their sauna or whatever. It is not uncommon for them to have severe effects related to sauna use when there's mold growing in the sauna. So ideally, in our picture perfect world, I would have a mold-free sauna and I would use that, and I would ideally be getting benefit from that. But that's just not the case or the instance in this certain season of life. And so I think that was just a really important connection and realization for me to make, was that, you know what, this just isn't a tool for me for this season. And this is causing me a lot more harm than good. And it's stimulating this trigger, all of these reactions that I've been experiencing due to my home environment. And so that's just not supportive right now. Additionally, I did my hair tissue mineral analysis. So if you've been following along for any amount of time at all, you are probably familiar with some of the functional lab testing that I offer through my practice, Haren Holistics. And hair tissue mineral analysis testing is one of those. And I love hair tissue mineral analysis testing because it can show us this greater picture of what's going on with the body, whereas a blood sample simply shows us just one instant in time what's in our blood at that exact moment. The hair holds on to minerals and heavy metals over a long period of time. So we're getting a better idea of how our body's handling stress, how we're detoxing, and how we're using minerals in our body. And so it's just really fascinating because I got my recent hair tissue mineral analysis and I was pretty depleted in a lot of minerals. And I'm not surprised because the amount of stress I had been under. And we know that stress rapidly depletes our mineral stores. And so for me to have that roadmap of my hair mineral analysis and see that, wow, I was really depleted in some of these key electrolytes and I was going to the sauna this much and sweating this much, that probably wasn't the ideal combination for me for healing during that season. Even though I was consuming my electrolyte rich water and all of this and adding in all these minerals in other ways in my life, I could still see from my hair test that my body was still under a significant amount of stress and my electrolytes were not totally replenished yet. And so that was a huge eye opener for me just to look at that on my labs and be like, okay, right now, I'm just not going to do that. My body's too stressed out and it cannot handle this. So I just want to throw that out there, the bad and the ugly of sauna use. And I think it's a prime example in the chaos of the wellness world that just because something has worked for you even or for your neighbor doesn't mean that it will work for you now in this season of your life. And that's something I have to remind myself of constantly. Like there are different tools to use in different seasons. And we can know the value, we can know the benefits, but we can also know pitfalls of certain things. So going back to sauna use. So now that we've talked about both sides of the coin, I do want to talk about what are good indicators that someone might be able to benefit from using the sauna. So if someone is really well nourished and they feel like they have general overall well-being and health, sometimes the sauna is a great tool to be able to use. Those that are having a healthy pregnancy or stable heart conditions, those with heavy metal toxicity can really benefit from it as long as they aren't having any weird side effects after using the sauna. Athletes who are looking for better recovery and better muscle repair after exercising. Individuals who might have chronic disease or conditions that prevent them from moving super well in the gym but can tolerate the heat pretty well. And also individuals who might be poor sweaters and want to ideally increase their ability to sweat efficiently and get their body's temperature regulation mechanisms more honed in. So we know that the ideal dose response for the sauna is 174 degrees, at least 20 minutes, 4 times a week. And the ideal dose response for the infrared sauna is 120 degrees Fahrenheit, at least 20 minutes for 4 times a week. But how do we know if we're in the sauna and it's really not benefiting us? So I think it's important to just be able to tune into the body and know, like, what are the symptoms that I'm experiencing? Am I feeling more level-headed? Am I feeling more clear-minded? Do I feel like I'm sweaty and energized? That's great. And you're probably right at the perfect amount of time in the sauna. Maybe you want to get out now while you're feeling good. Additionally, you aren't sweating, but you start to feel tired in the sauna. Now, this may be an indication that your detox pathways are not quite open yet, and that's okay. The body's amazing and self-healing and will adapt to the new stressor quickly. But it's important to start small and to gradually increase things over time. So if you aren't sweating, but you're feeling tired, it might be a good indicator to get out of the sauna. If you are feeling quite warm to the core and are wondering if you should stick it out more, but your core's feeling like really, really warm, I think that's a good indicator to get out too. Our core temperature tends to rise when under significant stress, and it can be really valuable to tune into that and listen to our body's responses in those situations. Additionally, the sauna will be way too much if you start to get dizzy, lightheaded, a headache, or you feel like you're going to pass out. Then you've probably definitely overdone it, and you will want to inform someone around you that you're feeling that way and make sure you get a lot of electrolytes in. So some of my favorite ways to get electrolytes in after I'm in the sauna are drinking electrolyte rich water. So my favorite brand are Crucial for electrolytes. I love that their salt and their electrolytes are purity and quality tested. They're tested for heavy metals, and I know that I am only getting the good stuff when I'm using their minerals. So I will link that in the show notes. Their electrolyte mix. I add that to my water bottle. I sip on that throughout the day, even if I'm not going to the sauna. Additionally, I like to utilize drinks like the adrenal cocktail. My go-to is just coconut water. Coconut water is one of the best sources of potassium. And I add a half lime to that and a little pinch of salt, and it is so good. It's like you put the lime in the coconut, you mix it all up, and it's just so chill. I love it. I don't know why it's so simple, but I just feel like it really satisfies the need at a cellular level for those minerals. Some other habits that I have that I find really valuable if I'm sweating a lot, whether it's in the sauna or simply just through a gym session, are foot soaks, baths, where I add magnesium chloride flakes. And so I'm able to soak in that magnesium, those electrolytes through my skin. I also like lotions or oils that are magnesium based. So I find it's a really easy habit to implement when I leave my magnesium lotion right by the bed, and I'm able to put that on every night before I go to bed. It's just super easy to implement. And then I always make sure I'm getting as many minerals from nutrient-rich foods as possible. So moving forward, if you're looking to start using the sauna or you're looking to maybe stop using the sauna, some of my recommendations would be, if you're looking to start slow. So lower temperatures if possible, shorter amounts of time. So 5 to 10 minutes for beginners. If it's too hot, move to a lower seat in the sauna. I think this is a huge thing. Sometimes we don't realize how much of a difference there is in the top seat of a sauna and the lower seat. Pick a temperature and time you're comfortable with and slowly increase by a couple minutes every week. Focus on remineralization after exposure. If you're not sure where your mineral status is at and you're feeling maybe a little bit depleted, I would recommend getting a hair tissue mineral analysis and seeing where your mineral status is at, seeing where your body needs a little bit extra support before exposing yourself to different stressors. If you feel like your body can't quite handle it, then that's a great time to get those labs and figure out what other stressors are going on in your life. Maybe we're not in that perfect sweet spot of stress. Maybe we're a little bit overstressed and we need to address some other things first. Anyways, I hope you found this episode valuable. I didn't know a lot of those things about the differences between infrared and traditional Finnish saunas before I put together a lot of this information. So I hope you found that valuable. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this episode, what you learned. I always like to know, and I'll see you next time.